What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I just wanted to do a quick talking headpiece discussing the aftermath and fallout from the last minute changes that the devs made with the interaction of low res to conviction and sundered monsters. So for those that aren't caught up to speed, about 24 hours ago, the devs made lower res to conviction work at 1/5 efficiency on sundered monsters. So this obviously has ramifications for lightning and fire damage dealing builds. It's going to sort of skew the cost investment to power between cold sorceresses and other builds. It will affect, in my opinion, the value of some items like Facets and Phoenix might be more valuable to make initially for fire damage dealing builds over conviction. I want to explain that. I do want to talk about some builds that have been disproportionately affected, like the Trapsin. And then I do want to wrap up this video by just talking about something that has sort of bothered me with Terror Zones. I think people have forgotten how good some traditional areas are. You don't have to farm every single rotating Terror Zone. So I want to discuss all that in today's video. Again, I will have timestamps in the description below, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let's jump in. So the first thing that I want to bring up is fire damage dealing builds and lightning damage dealing builds are better than what they were in patch 2.4. Yes, this will reduce the endgame effectiveness, so we're talking like 20 higher investment builds. They won't completely melt everything, but fire is still stronger than it was in patch 2.4, and so is lightning. A Venom Lord and Chaos Sanctuary, for example, being at a flat 140 res and being completely unbreakable versus like best case scenario gear, bringing them down to like anywhere from like -5 to +20 fire res, that is still a big bump forward. So I want to make that very clear. Yes, the best possible endgame setups have been sort of reduced in power, which a lot of people are probably happy with. They think that Thunder Charms introduced power creep, but fire and lightning is better than what it was before. Is it maybe not quite as effective for the cost investment compared to a cold sorceress? Yes, absolutely. That's going to be my second point, but fire and lightning is still better than what it was in patch 2.4. So to illustrate my point, I want to quickly discuss some resistance mechanics with the Fire Druid and a Venom Lord prior to the change and then post change. So if I encounter a Venom Lord and I'm using a Fire Thunder Charm, I will now bring that monster's res down to 95. Now let's apply -85 from a level 12 conviction on Infinity, working at full effectiveness, -25 from a perfect Fire Facet Ravenlore, -28 from Phoenix, and -30 from a perfect Fire Facet Crystal Sword. That Venom Lord will now be at -73 fire res. Now post change, we encounter that same Venom Lord, Sundered Charm brings it down to 95, then we apply -17 from Infinity working at 1/5 efficiency, -25 from a perfect Fire Facet Ravenlore, -28 from Phoenix, and -30 from a perfect Fire Facet Crystal Sword. That monster is now at -5 res. Would you not agree that -5 is better than a hard 140 that you can't break? Yes, it's not quite this full extent of -73, but it's still a drastic step forward compared to what fire would do in patch 2.4. So yes, sort of like the best possible endgame gear, the damage has been reduced, but it's definitely still a huge step forward. Now moving on to my second point, I think the biggest feedback that I got from my comment section as well as my live stream that I did discussing these changes is that the community is upset with the balance of power between a cold sorceress and cold mastery and the relative investment of, say, a fire and lightning damage dealing build. What's the point of investing 20 plus higher runes into a fire build that matches the damage output of, say, a 1 or 2 higher investment cold sorceress? I absolutely agree with this point. I definitely think it's unbalanced, and that's where most of the negative feedback I've been receiving is sort of centered around. I think that they should have either left cold res working at full efficiency and infinity working at full efficiency, because then you get that big damage value out of Burmal Burist, or have low res and infinity fiction work at 1/5 efficiency and then have cold mastery work at 1/5 efficiency. That would sort of balance the scales, because right now, as it currently stands, a much lower cost investment cold sorceress can farm everywhere and do more damage than insane investment, say fire or lightning damage dealing build. There's a big disparity there, and I think that they should either have both working at full effectiveness or both working at 1/5 efficiency. That would kind of address a lot of the negative feedback that I have personally seen. So moving on to what I think is the most interesting change, and that is the focus on itemization. I definitely think that in some specific builds, it might make more sense to either prioritize facets or negative res gear over making that very expensive infinity, which is interesting because I have seen a common theme of a lot of people being upset that so many builds are centered around infinity. And infinity will still be the kingpin rune word, but if you take a Fire Druid, for example, wouldn't it make more sense to prioritize a Fire Facet Sword or a really nice Fire Facet Ravenlore or even Phoenix to get that full negative res effectiveness against a Sundered monster instead of spending Burmal Burist for -17? I mean, you tell me, but a -20 Ravenlore is going to be a lot cheaper than Infinity. And you have -20 res versus -17. So a unique item giving you -20 res, a very expensive rune word, giving you negative 17. It's just kind of interesting that sort of the shift in value of facets and negative res gears, it's going to be prioritized more in my opinion. Again, this will sort of depend on the build because obviously facets don't work with Atrapsin, so it is a little bit build specific. But I do think it's interesting that the value of some items, or maybe the priority, in order of rolling specific rune words, might be flipped on its head a little bit. So I want to shift now to talking a little bit about which builds have been impacted the most and the least. So obviously the Cold Sorceress and Cold Mastery, super powerful. If you have 36 points to Cold Mastery, every single monster will be sitting at negative 100 cold res, so she's affected the least. I think that you're probably transitioning to lightning and fire being affected the second least because there's a lot of sources of negative lightning and fire res. So whether it's T-Strokes, Griffins, Crescent Moon, or Ravenlore, Fire Facet Sword, Phoenix Runeword, full Tal set with Fire Facets, there's a lot of additional sources of negative fire res, so I think that those builds are impacted the second least. Unfortunately, cold builds outside of the Cold Sorceress have been impacted quite a bit because there's not a lot of sources of negative cold res. I mean, now that I think about it, there's Ice and Wizendraw for the Boazon, there's Doom, and then Cold Facets. There's not really a lot of additional sources, so I think they're impacted quite a bit. And I do think that the Trapsin is disproportionately affected from these changes. That's because negative res does not apply to your trap damage at all. So yes, you're kind of taking a step forward with Sundered Monsters now. You could break a couple lightning immunities that you couldn't before with Infinity, but she's really affected the most because you're not gaining anything from any additional source of negative res. So definitely Cold Sorceress is impacted the least, and I think that the Trapsin is probably impacted the most. So wrapping up today's video, I want to stress one important key fact that I think a lot of people have forgotten with the introduction of Terra Zones. Whether you like them or you dislike them, you think it ruins the race to 99, I think a lot of people have forgotten that traditional magic finding locations are still good spots to magic find. Unless you're dead set on being the first to race to level 99 and you have a coordinated 8-man group and you want to make sure that you have a character that can farm every single terrorized location, you can still farm traditional magic find spots if they're not desirable locations based on your character build. So let's say you're playing as a fire druid and Cows becomes terrorized. You can go rip through that area, it's great. If you don't have a Sundered Charm yet and Chaos spawns terrorized, you can still farm the Stony Tombs. It's still one of the best areas to magic find in the game. So you can always focus on those traditional magic finding locations. Again, if you're a Blizzard Sorceress, you don't have a Cold Sundered Charm yet, and terrorized Cows pops up, go around that location. If a terrorized Icy Cellar pops up and you can't do anything, you can always go Motric Mephisto. You can go farm Pendle for an hour. You can go run Ancient Tunnels and wait till the next consecutive Terra Zone spawns. You're not locked into this mentality, or I think a lot of people are locked in this mentality of you need to focus on every single Terra Zone shifting and then farming it. Unless you're racing to 99, I don't think that's the case. But that wraps up today's video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, 5 key points that I wanted to discuss for the kind of aftermath or sort of fallout from these last minute changes. Again, feel free to let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree or disagree. I hope you're excited for Ladder tomorrow. I will be streaming live on YouTube. I'm doing an 8-man push reset to Hellbale. That should be a lot of fun. And then I do want to make a lot of different, like terrorized zone content and mechanics and just group farming and stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the Ladder, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace.